think it's fair to say that the job market is weird right now. Honestly, weird is putting it lightly. I've been seeing crazy numbers like 74% of devs are struggling to land a job despite demand going up. 40% of employed devs are planning to leave their current job within a year, which is even crazier. And when you look at the split across different levels of experience for headcount at companies, you see junior engineers collapsing, as well as mid-career and senior engineers rising meaningfully. At the same time, there's lots of other numbers that contradict this, like the number of recent grads that are struggling to find jobs going up a bit, sure, but that's about 1% increase and nowhere near as bad as things were during the recession in the early 2010s, where it was much higher, closer to 8% of new grads. So what does this all mean? It means that we need to think a bit differently about the job market. Most of the advice that is available today is dated at best and harmful at worst, and I want to do my best to break this down. My goal here is to make a video that's useful to people who are experienced engineers, maybe considering a new gig, new grads, or people recently in the field that are trying to get their first job, but also for hiring managers, people who are looking to level up their teams by bringing in the right people at the right time to build something awesome. To get this right, we're going to need to rethink a lot about how hiring works and how you get the right people on your teams and what they're even doing in the first place. Our roles are changing actively, and as such, the way that we hire should change too. And I don't think it's changing fast enough. And that's why I'm going to do my best to break this all down for you right after a word from today's sponsor. I have a confession to make. I stopped using GitHub. Actions. Kind of. We just moved all of our stuff over to Blacksmith, and it has been so much better. I can tell you all about how Mintlify cut their build times and CI costs in half, or how they're going to cut their Docker build times by up to 40x due to the Docker layer caching. But I'm not going to tell you about any of those things. I'm going to tell you about how great it is having real observability in your GitHub actions. It's hilarious that this is just not a thing on GitHub itself, but look at this. We can see all of the runs when they're happening. We can see failed runs and why they're happening. We can look at failure rates for different tests. We can see what's going on in our actions. You know, the thing you can't do on GitHub at all. So if you're actually using actions for anything useful, check them out now at soydev.link/blacksmith. I'm going to do my best to break down all of this chaos into three core parts. Companies suck at hiring, experienced devs suck at growing, and juniors suck in general, but should lean into it. The junior stuff's going to come near the end, so make sure you stick around for it, but I think all of this will be useful for every level of dev as you try to rethink how this stuff works going forward. Let's start with one of my favorite topics, which is that companies suck at hiring. There are so many layers to this, but I'm just going to start with one of my personal favorites: how interviews and candidate processes tend to go. If you're new here, you should probably hit that sub button. It doesn't cost you anything, and half of you guys aren't subbed. It's a good way to keep up with what's going on. But if you have been around for a while, you might remember my mock job interview I did with Dan Abramov as my second actual video on my channel. It was a live stream where I did an actual mock job interview with Dan Abramov, who is the creator of Redux and a core contributor of React, often jokingly called the creator of React. And I went really hard in this because I thought how technical candidates were interviewed was fundamentally flawed. I did a lot of different things in this video to try and make it easier for people to hire well. One of those things is I shared a technical interview document publicly. Whenever I bring a candidate in for a technical vetting process to figure out if they are good enough technically to be hired for the role, I try my hardest to set the candidate up for success. And this is the first mistake I see a lot in interviews. It feels too much like interviews are set up for gotchas instead of success. The goal of an interview should be the same as your goal as a manager. Set your team up to be as successful as possible by letting them use the right tools, processes, systems, and things that make it easier to succeed. You should want your team to use the things that make them as successful as possible, and you should do the same thing around your interviews. But what if they're using Claude or ChatGPT or Cursor to cheat? They should be using those for their job as well then. Find ways to test their capability that push against the things that you're concerned about. Because when you say that, your concern isn't that they are going to use Cursor on the job. They should. They should use tools like that to be more successful. Your concern is that when things go wrong, they might not have the knowledge necessary to dig themselves out of that hole. And for the last decade and a half plus, we've relied on their ability to describe code on a whiteboard and write a crappy app in 20 minutes that's just sorting a fucking tree as our way of knowing if they know what they're talking about or not. That was always bad, to be clear. But now it's worse than ever because the same things we use to poorly vet someone's technical ability are things that agents can do immediately with no effort. The fact that Cluely was so successful is, again, proof that the process itself is flawed. Because if your interview can be cheated by a crappy AI app and your job can't, then there's a gap between what the job expects and what the interview expects, which means you're doing a bad job interviewing. That's why I always have done interviews quite a bit differently. I specifically try to give options to my candidates because my candidates should have the choice of how they think they would best present their capability. Again, setting them up for success. What process gives them the highest likelihood of succeeding? Obviously, the choice they make is something I factor in when I am reviewing them. And long term, I don't think the leak code algorithm puzzles are probably something we should include in interviews because they were always bad. I mostly had this option in here for the candidates that tried really hard on these things, that had spent a lot of time skilling up on it, and as a result, felt more comfortable with this. Because again, you want the candidate to be set up for success, and being comfortable is a really big part of that success. So if this is what they're comfortable with, this is what they choose. I give examples of where these types of problems come from, and I said, a pro tip, most of our problems will probably be based on Advent of Code because the team are all Advent of Code players. We all take it way too seriously, and most of my challenges were based some amount around Advent of Code. I describe what we do. I say, remember, our goal isn't to see how fast you write the right answer. We're trying to learn about how you work and communicate because that's what makes you a good candidate. I describe the general structure of this interview. There's 15 minutes of general tech plus team experience questions. I give a direct example. 30 to 45 minutes of the code puzzle. I can say it's pseudocode or real code, whatever you prefer. And the remaining time would be used for questions about the company, role expectations, etc. Very, very clear expectations. Nobody coming in for a technical interview would read this and choose it and not know what they're going in for. Option 2, the pragmatist. This is my attempt to do something more like real world work, where I give you a project or a spec or an API and say, implement this part of it. Funny enough, not dissimilar to how I use agents today, where I give the specs, the expectation, what I want the output to be, and then see if the candidate can complete it. Obviously, with how things are structured nowadays, this is a question that could almost certainly be completed by an agent in seconds, but I could also then ask the candidate questions about the code that comes out and how it works. In fact, I would already do that when I worked with these problems with these candidates. When they wrote the code, I would ask them, oh, why did you break out this component? How would you reuse this? How would you make this piece reusable somewhere else? And have the conversation, because that's really what matters with these interviews. You're talking about hiring somebody who's going to work with you every day, somebody who's going to be in your meetings with you, in your Slack with you, at your lunch with you. Your ability to communicate with them is way more important than how many lines of slop they can generate. And then my personal favorite option, the realist. You bring your own repo or project, ideally something open source, and then we shadow you as you work on something for it. So if you have a feature you want to add to your project, a thing you want to build or complete or work on, a bug you want to fix, you send me the repo, you send me information on what you plan to do, and if I think this is a good way to vet your technical skill and communication, then we work on it together for 1 to 2 hours. And by together, I mean you drive and do most of it, and I ask questions throughout. Again, to see what it is like to actually work with you. That's the point of all of these options, including my favorite one, the specialist. The point here is that if you don't think these ways of interviews work, you can propose your own. If you think you can have your own way to showcase your skills, bring it with you. Show it to me, and I would be hyped to learn. Sadly, I've never had anyone take this option, but also I usually don't hire people that haven't already proven their technical skill. Because if you have a GitHub full of really useful things, or I've interacted with you in the past on different projects, I don't need to do any of this. This all gets thrown away if I already know that you're good. It's kind of ironic that I have what I would consider to be one of the best technical interview processes, and I also don't do technical interviews anymore because I only hire people that have already proven themselves. So despite having one of the best processes, I end up using it the least. That's part of why I'm putting it out here and continuing to leave it open source and available, because I want more people to think deeply about whether or not their interview process is checking your bullshit leak code skills or is actually seeing what it's like to work with somebody, because that's what you should be hiring for, compatibility with your team. So I think we've established the current way people do technical interviews is bullshit and should be rethought. Something like this. Obviously, there are parts of this that don't make as much sense anymore, but really focusing in on transparency, clarity, comfort, and communication will make your interviews way better. The candidate should feel like you're on their team, not like you're using a microscope or a magnifying glass to catch every little thing they do wrong. Because this person's going to be on your team. You want them to be supported. Support them through the process. But in order to get that far, you need to get through some other things that are honestly kind of bullshit. Here's where you have to talk about resume slop a bit. Cold applications are just a garbage thing right now, because every time a job listing goes up, lots of people spam it hoping to get an in. People will generate resumes using all sorts of tools, fill them with fake information and absolute bullshit, in hopes that they get enough attention to have their name clicked on in the pile of 10,000 names, mind you, all of which are being read by a non-technical recruiter at the company. This stuff just is bullshit. It isn't going to get you a job. Like, do you actually think your resume in this gigantic pile of PDFs is magical enough that a random recruiter that doesn't know shit about code is going to read through it, see yours, and pick you? You need to be realistic about this. Cold apps just don't work anymore. You need to find a way to get in front of a person, ideally a technical one, so they know you're a real human, because the realness and the transparency is now rarer than ever. AI making slop so common means that being genuine and real is now an outstanding angle to have and a lever you can use against all of this bullshit. Things like interacting with posts from engineers at the companies that you're looking at. Local tech meetups if you live in a place that have that type of thing, although local tech jobs are a whole fucking mess of their own. But finding ways to get FaceTime and interactions with the people at the company you're talking about is essential, because you want to really increase the odds that you can get through that first round and get in front of a technical person so that you have a higher chance of getting along with them, getting to showcase your comms abilities, learn something, and then get the role. But if you're sitting in my comment section like, I can't get a job, the whole market is fucked, I applied to 500 companies and didn't get a single response, and your definition of application is going to random job listing boards online and finding their hiring sections and submitting a PDF and not even adding anything specific to the company, of course you're not going to get fucking hired. There are people trying harder than you. Don't think you're going to get handed a job on a silver fucking platter. It's not how this works. And to their credit, the companies are very largely at fault here. Companies are so bad at hiring that they're still doing it like it's the early 2000s. They're putting up these weird listings on terrible boards that expect you to submit a PDF or docx file in a specific format that nobody even fucking reads, and then has a non-technical person reading through all of it. They deserve the bullshit employees they're getting as a result. You gotta work around that. If you're doing all these things right and you're still not getting a job, you should also try and be thankful that the companies you talked to that weren't good didn't accidentally hire you into a role that would suck. That said, you also all need to stop fucking coping. I'm already seeing it in my chat. Is stalking now a genuine job search technique? You deserve your unemployment if you think interacting with people working at the companies you're interested in based on your shared mutual interests is stalking. Your understanding of basic social norms is so bad that you're not going to get a job. And it's weird to put it this way. We'll probably talk about this more in the junior section, but your ability to socialize on a basic level went from a nice to have to a borderline essential skill if you want to get a job today. I have a lot more thoughts on why companies suck at hiring, but I'm going to dive into the experienced devs part because I think it'll cover a lot of this as well. It's hard to know which of these numbers is the most real when it comes to what the current state of unemployment and job struggles are in the market. Like the info from HackerRank, this 74% number is an interview that they did with their audience. And obviously a platform like HackerRank for getting a job is going to have a different set of numbers than places that are interviewing engineers in general. So I don't know which of these numbers we can really trust. What I do know is that I'm seeing less junior devs on average getting roles, and I see more senior devs on average getting in demand. But what I'm also seeing is a lot of experienced devs that are struggling a lot, both at their current role in their current job, as well as presenting themselves as a good option for getting a job other places. There are lots of people that did their first ever interviews right after college, got one job out of the 10 they did, and have just stayed there indefinitely, have never bothered leaving because they don't really want to. And now they go out and do interviews and they're performing in them slightly worse than they did when they first got jobs 5 or 6 years ago because they haven't refined the skill at all since. And that's not the only skill they haven't refined. Once you've had a job for a while, your willingness to learn almost inherently starts to go down. As your job gets more and more specific internally, your likelihood of exploring other things outside of the job inherently goes down. And if you're at one of those companies that isn't letting you use AI tools internally, you're probably falling behind in that regard too, which is terrifying because those junior devs that don't have jobs don't have any of those restrictions on them. You need to put more work into staying ahead. Here's another way of thinking of it. When a junior engineer comes in, they have lots more energy. They don't have the jaded attitudes that people get over time. They're not as restricted to certain ways of thinking or doing things. but they don't have the same capability, be it their experience in general, like they don't know what languages have what compromises, what libraries do and don't make sense, how you deal with outages at a company, all those types of things, but also role-specific capabilities and company-specific capabilities. They don't have the institutional knowledge of how your business operates. Whereas an existing senior dev at your company has lots of capability. They have years of experience that are both generic in terms of how things work, but also specific in terms of how your company works. But their energy and their willingness to learn new things has gone down as a result. There's always a trade-off here. The better somebody knows how to build, and more importantly, how to work at your business, the lower their ability is to go try other things and experiment and explore. And balancing these two things over time is essential as a business trying to operate long-term. The real win is when you find ways to get energy transferred effectively from juniors to seniors. And the trade-off is that the senior engineers get excited working with and hanging with those junior engineers, and they inherently pass some of their capability on to the juniors. Once you can build that type of relationship as a business, that's when things really start to go crazy. When the seniors trade their capability for the juniors' energy and everything feeds in and you grow. This is why people like Dan Abramov used to brand themselves as a junior for life, because they wanted to maintain their energy more than anything. And as you get more experience, you'll find yourself longing for this. I like to think I have higher energy than average for somebody with my 15 years of experience because I love new shit. That's just how I am. That's why I have this channel. I love exploring new solutions to problems and then bringing them to people who might not have went and found them themselves in the first place. That is just one of the most fun things for me. And I think it was the senior engineers encouraging that in me early in my career that helped me maintain it over time. This is also a thing that big companies seem to be struggling a lot with. I've been thinking about this clip nonstop since I first saw it.
For the first 25 years of Netflix, if I'm correct, the only software engineering level used to be a senior software engineer. You've now started to hire earlier career software engineers. Can you tell me on how that has changed the culture at Netflix?
We've had a great experience with new grads and early career talent, and also our internship program, which you mentioned. We were starting from a very different place than a lot of other tech companies. So when you look at the distribution of levels or talent at some of the other larger tech companies, they had in some cases 30, 40, 50%, what I'll call level 3, level 4 engineers. So when you think about a new technology shift or the work that those companies need to do now, I understand why they might need a different distribution of talent. We were starting at 0% in most cases. We had mostly a level 5 and above population. So we had a huge opportunity to complement the team we had with earlier career talent who brings new skills, new perspectives, great energy to the teams. And with a technology shift right now with Gen AI, a lot of native AI familiarity. So when you think about somebody who's graduated from school in the last few years, they're very accustomed to using AI in whether it's developing products, writing code, thinking about solving data problems. It's actually a useful way to bring new skills and perspectives to the team. I think we will absolutely maintain that investment in earlier career talent because it's been so additive in different parts of the business. But I also think everything in its right proportion. There's plenty of problems where we need extremely...
You get the idea. The very interesting thing that was touched on here is this idea that newer career devs, earlier career devs, bring unique energy, unique perspectives, and what she referred to as native Gen AI attitudes and perspectives. I have a lot of thoughts on that, but don't worry. But I want to give a little more advice to the seniors first. There's a good chance if you're a senior developer that is starting to do more interviews, you haven't done them in a while. I highly recommend, first and foremost, that you do a lot of them on the other side. Take advantage of the fact that you have a job and see how much you can get involved in the interview process. Do way more interviews. Almost every time I talk to a person that's struggling to get a job that has years of experience, they have almost no experience facilitating interviews. The more you can facilitate, the more you can see the other side, the more you can become aware of what a good or bad interview looks like and can make changes accordingly. You need to be really introspective, more so than ever now, because historically, code was so rare and coders were so valuable that developers were allowed into roles that they might not have had the linguistic capabilities for. People who weren't very pleasant or good at communication would get away with it because the need for rock star developers was so high. Now, there are people who are not necessarily as technically gifted, but are way better at communication that are much more obviously good hires because those communication skills have never mattered more. And this is regardless of your perspective on AI. If you think all AI code is slop and that your handwritten C is the only right way of doing things, you might be right. But it doesn't matter how right you are if you can't convince anybody. So if you're going to compete with AI slop being churned out by these Claude Code kids that have never written a real line of code, you better be able to explain why your stuff is better. Getting better at communication and explaining your ideas has never been more important, and historically hasn't even been that valuable as a developer. Now that that has shifted, you need to present yourself differently. Do more presentations internally. Take more time to document things, to write internal blog posts about things, to see if some of those blog posts can be published externally to discuss your engineering learnings as a business. Find ways and incentives to better your communication skills, because otherwise you will lose to the AI whether or not it is better, because you can't properly communicate why you're right. And I promise you, almost all of the people I am thinking of here, the ones who are experienced devs who can make great code that are struggling to get jobs, 100% of the time suck at communication. You have to get over that. Not being able to clearly describe what you're doing and why was only acceptable because of the nature of code being novel enough. We are past that point. Get over your shit. But now we need to talk about the thing most of y'all are here for. Junior devs. It's tough out there. I won't pretend otherwise. Getting the attention of an experienced enough dev to even be considered is not easy. We need to do things a bit differently and use every lever you have. But before we can start doing things right, we have to stop doing things wrong. Let's go through some of the most common mistakes I see with earlier career devs. I already talked about the cold apps. Cold applying to random companies with shitty resumes that you generated on ChatGPT is not going to get you anywhere. And no, a handcrafted one isn't going to get you that much further. Cold apps are dead. There's just too much shit going in. You need some way to stand out from it. And the way you stand out isn't anything you can put on the resume. It's humans. It needs to feel more real. I've said this for a while, but the biggest differentiator in everything, but especially hiring, is trust. You need to find ways to build trust. If you're an early career dev, we can't trust your job history because it's not there. So we need other things we can trust. Things we can trust include somebody at the company thinking you're pretty good, somebody recognizing one of the libraries you use, somebody reading one of your blog posts and realizing that it's relevant to their work. Whatever you can do to build up trust is going to be key. Remember that we'll be talking a lot more about trust in a bit. So cold apps suck. Don't expect that to be a thing that will get you anywhere. Your professor sucks too. This is another really important thing to understand. Something I've seen a lot of is earlier career devs or people fresh out of college, and the best dev they've ever known was their professor. The harsh reality is that your professor is almost certainly not a very good dev, because most professors make less money than good devs. And if your professor is teaching, it's probably because they didn't like doing, they didn't do well with the doing, or they got tired of it for some reason. And I can't tell you how many times I saw in college that my peers were running circles around my professors. And I was lucky that my professors largely understood this. They knew their experience was really, really behind, and they leaned on the students that were most excited, most energized, and most ready to teach those things to guide us towards what the most useful things were. Your professor can teach you a lot about how to think technically about problems, but they will not teach you how to get a job. They will not teach you what working in the industry looks like today. They will certainly not teach you about getting ahead of your peers in a way that makes you more likely to succeed beyond giving you homework that you're probably using AI to cheat on anyways. Your professor is not going to give you the pieces you need and the knowledge you need to get your job. Another common mistake I see is obsessing over qualifications. And I understand why this happens. In order to get into college in the first place, you needed to have all of these crazy accolades on your application. Like you were the head of some club at your school, or you had this experience working this specific charity, or you had really high grades, you got the perfect score on the SAT, all those types of things. That shit does not matter anymore. It barely did before, and it does not matter now. Chasing prestige, chasing accolades, chasing these qualifications is not going to help. And going and getting some random certification from Microsoft that you're Azure certified or Office certified, none of that shit matters. I don't know anyone who's hired anybody in the last 10 years based on their qualifications in those senses. They are hiring based on the fact that they are potentially good fits for the team. That is it. And now for the thing that will likely be the topic for most of the rest of the video. Outsourcing your learning via AI. Or put differently, avoiding learning with AI. Feeling dumb sucks. Humans optimize their lives to avoid it. And it makes sense why, like biologically speaking, if you have the option between two foods, one that you're familiar with, have eaten a lot, and know is safe, and one that you've never seen before or tried before, the one you've never tried could be poisonous. So obviously you don't want to try it. The fact that you don't understand it makes you inherently averse to it. But the harsh reality about software engineering is that you are at your best when you feel kind of dumb. That's when you are pushing past your experience, past your expertise, and building yourself up and growing. Does this mean you should avoid using AI tools? No. Notice my wording here. Avoiding learning with AI is the key. Not that you should avoid learning with AI, but this is a thing that you are probably doing right now. When you run into a problem and you don't understand it, you use the AI to work around it or to have it solve it for you, and you don't improve your own understanding at all. You are averse to this feeling of being unsure or clueless, and rather than embrace it and spend time in it and resolve it, you outsource it so you don't have to spend any time in it. And that keeps you from building up skills that are valuable. To contradict myself a little bit here, HTMX is a project that is largely by a professor. His name's Carson. He's great. Carson thinks a lot about how we learn, and he knows that his students are going to use AI tools. Instead of just letting them cheat on all their homework with that, he actually goes the other way. He knows that the students are going to be using these types of AI tools, so he instead hands them an AgentMD file. If you're not familiar, an AgentMD file or a ClaudeMD file steers the agent by putting something at the start of the context that gives it instructions on how to operate generally. Here is said AgentMD. Primary role is teaching assistant, not code generator. AI agents should function as teaching aids that help students learn through explanation, guidance, and feedback, not by solving problems for them. I see that M-, you generated this, didn't you, you sly fox? What agents should do: explain concepts where students are confused, point students to relevant lecture materials or documentation, review code that students have written and suggest improvements, help debug by asking guiding questions rather than providing fixes, explain error messages and what they mean, suggest approaches or algorithms at a high level, provide small code examples that are 2 to 5 lines to illustrate specific concepts, help students understand assembly instructions and register usage. That one's a bit of a reach, but I understand. And explain memory layouts and pointer arithmetic when asked. What agents shouldn't do: write entire functions or complete implementations, generate full solutions to assignments, complete to-do sections in assignment code, refactor large portions of student code, provide solutions to quiz or exam questions, write more than a few lines of code at once, convert requirements directly into working code. It gives guides on the teaching approach, on how it should give good code examples, and then the classic, this belongs in any good AgentMD or guiding file, examples of what good looks like and examples of what bad looks like. And to be clear, he doesn't enforce this in his courses. He wrote this and published it and recommends it, saying, look, here are the guardrails. I can't make you use the guardrails. If you want to be a good programmer, though, you should use these guardrails. He moved everything to in-person on paper to make it harder for people to cheat with AI, yada, yada. Adapt, improvise, readapt. Love this framing. In particular, this is one of the things I love about Carson. He constantly is reflecting on what isn't working, and instead of rejecting the norms and rejecting where things are going, he finds ways to adapt them to better fit into his role, which is setting his students up for success. I wish we had more professors like him. He is very, very good at this. But I will contradict him a tiny bit here. Not in this and using it for his coursework. Absolutely. If you're taking a course from him or someone like him, highly recommend for all the coursework you use an AgentMD like this and you follow the rules accordingly. This will make you much more likely to succeed. But at the same time, you have a really unique lever you can be using right now. Here's where we're going to start talking about the things you should do instead. Before we can do that, though, I want to go on one of my personal favorite tangents. We're going to talk about mobile applications for a little bit. If you are younger, as in like a Gen Z that's going through college or finishing it up right now, some of the points I'm about to make might date me a lot. I know I'm about to unk status myself hard, but hear me out, okay? Imagine back in the day, you see mobile phones suddenly getting really good. Historically, we've used computers for everything. I know you guys are learning how to use computers now in college, but we used to have to do it in elementary school. And no, I'm not talking about a Chromebook. I'm talking about an actual computer with files where we would plug in flash drives and floppy disks, if you remember what those are. Suddenly, mobile phones started to get way more powerful. They could do more. They could send emails. They could browse the web. They got really powerful, and it happened really quickly. And you see an obvious trend here. You know the future. It's clear. We're going to be using computers less and our phones more. Why would we reach for a gigantic laptop in our bag when we could just pull out our phone and do the thing? And you want to bet on the future. You're scared of falling behind, and you know this is what's going to happen. So regardless of how much experience you have, what work you're doing, you decide it's time to go all in on mobile. So you drop everything to build Java applets for the Nokia Sidekick. Yeah. This is kind of funny in retrospect, but at the time, it was pretty clear more and more things were going to move to mobile. And if you didn't want to fall behind, it made a lot of sense to go put all of your effort and time into building things for mobile phones. So you would build for Sidekicks or Blackberries or the things that were popular at the time, all of which together had less than 5% of the global phone market share, because smartphones, as we knew them, these types of devices, just weren't that popular. The hope was that long-term they would become more popular, and they did, but they got more popular in a very different fashion. They didn't look like this. It looked like the phone you're watching this on, the iPhone. The iPhone changed everything, and when the iPhone first dropped, they didn't even have an app store. All they had was HTML5 and web apps that were inherently really limited. About a year and a half after the iPhone dropped, they realized they needed to let you build real apps, so they put out an SDK and an app store. But think about this for a second. The Sidekick came out in 2002, and lots of new versions came out over the next few years. The original iPhone was 2007, 5 years later. Now imagine you spent 5 years going all in on Sidekick development, on BlackBerry development, on Nokia development, building for all these weird bespoke proprietary operating systems. And then the iPhone comes out, takes half the market, 50x what you thought was even possible, but all your experience is building apps for these old, dated, archaic platforms. You don't even know how to interface with a touchscreen properly. You're switching languages, you're switching ecosystems, you're switching operating systems, you're switching user experiences, you're switching expectations. Everything changes going from Nokia dev to iPhone dev. So effectively what happened there is you just wasted years of experience, and it'll take you even more time to unlearn it. So let's think about this. Who's better off? A developer with 10 years of experience who just spent 3 years building for dead platform that has to unlearn all that BS for the new thing. Or somebody who's fresh out of college, never learned wrong thing, and is excited to go all in on right new thing. Which of these people is better off? Very obviously, these ones. The people who don't have to unlearn the weird ways that they did things in the past and can just dive in fully on the new way of doing. So this is obviously about mobile, but let's talk about AI dev. Imagine a developer who's been coding for 10 years. They used to be a big Sublime Text person. They moved to VS Code, and now they're all in on Vim. They became a hardcore NeoVim person. They've been building for all sorts of different things at their job and realized that this AI stuff probably matters. So they put a lot of time into their custom config, trying to get stuff like, the classic Copilot working in Vim. Worked really hard to do that, started using stuff like SuperMaven, tried their best because they cared so much about their developer experience and their use of their editor that they wanted to do everything through the lens of Vim. Now, all of a sudden, we are using agents in our terminals and our IDEs and all these other places to generate all of that code. And they are fighting tooth and nail, pretending that none of that matters and that they are still way better. But now they have to deal with it now. Maybe 6 months ago they didn't, but now these tools are good enough. If you're not using them, you are definitely falling behind some amount. Their willingness to unlearn all of their way of doing things for long enough to embrace these new things is way lower. The 10 plus years they have of experience is hurting them now. And everybody's saying I'm sneak dissing Prime. No, I actually love Prime for this reason. I think Primeagen is doing a great job of challenging his notions and not letting his way of building things traditionally keep him from trying out new things. For every person like Prime who's actually trying to figure out why we're all so hyped, there are literally 100 plus that have no interest at all, that are coping and running in circles claiming that everybody's doing slop and they're the one doing things right. And that same person also sucks at communication, so you can mostly ignore them. But you're not that person. You're fresh out of college. You're really excited to try out all of these new things. You're playing with new stuff. You're doing whatever you can to accelerate your own stuff, your ideas. You got into code, some part because you want to make money, but some part because building things on a computer seemed fun to you. At least I hope. If you're just here for the money, go somewhere else. My channel's not for people who are just using software to make money. We love this stuff. And I like programming, which makes a lot of people question why I like this AI stuff. I like programming because I like the problem-solving aspect, and I like building useful things for myself and for others. And with AI, all of that's gotten way better. So imagine the person who just loves their BlackBerry, who's been building apps for BlackBerry, who dedicated their whole life to the BlackBerry ecosystem. Obviously, that person is going to be useless when the company needs to build a phone app. That's kind of where we're at now, too. These people who have 10 years of legacy way of building that are deeply attached to each individual piece of the software stack they use, of the editor that they build in, all of those things, that person is not going to embrace this stuff without a lot of incentive to do such. And they also probably have less energy at this point too, because they were trying all sorts of new things early in their career. They slowly settled on what they have, and now they're not as interested in trying new stuff. That is not the case down here. Somebody who's fresh out of college is not going to be unwilling to try a new editor. They're not going to be unwilling to check out these new dev tools. They're not going to be unwilling to explore these things. In fact, quite the opposite. They might be excited about them. They might be trying all sorts of new stuff. And that's one of the things I want to encourage. On one hand, when you're doing your coursework, you shouldn't be using AI to cheat. I highly recommend this guest, and the link will be in the description, don't worry, if you want to use AI correctly in class. But the harsh reality is that if you're only coding for classwork and you're not doing anything else outside of it, you're probably fucked. So to go back up here, what you should do instead is use the new tools to do cool shit. I don't mean you should use it to cheat on your work, but maybe if one of your assignments in class was really cool and you want to build it into something more thorough, you can work with some of these new AI tools to push it further, to build something bigger. Maybe there's a club in school that you really like that needs a better way to keep track of its balance and its budget and what people are doing for the club. Vibe code an app using these new tools to try and make that useful. I'm at the point where in an average workday where I'm actually sitting and doing things for my job, for my channel, for my companies, for my products, I am vibe coding 1 to 2 new apps from scratch a day to just experiment with ideas, try to solve problems, build things in the background. Even now, as I'm streaming, I'm working on a project to help me find and identify project ideas and video ideas based on things being posted on HN and on places like Simon Willison's blog. And I'm going to compare that against my channel and use an AI agent to compare and contrast and find ideas that I might not have covered yet that could be good topics for my channel. I just build random shit like this all the time. When I have a theory or an idea or some question I want to answer, I love using these tools to build all of this stuff. One more borderline essential thing that, like, especially in college, but especially if you're not in college, is essential to everything we talked about here: collaboration. Most of your coursework is going to be individual, things that you're working on independently yourself, like your tests and your homework. There will be some amount of coursework that is hopefully collaborative, but that varies a lot depending on the school, the program, and many other things. Your job isn't just to take an issue and write code. Your job is to be a member of a team. And working with other people is essential to being successful in this field. Getting good at collaborating is key. Collaboration can be all sorts of different things. It can be mentoring earlier students and helping them with their homework. It can be building things with your friends that are useful to the clubs that you attend. It could be making a project with a few friends to help you keep track of stats in a video game you play. It could be going to hackathons and building things from scratch at those. Hackathons in general are really cool. Finding opportunities to collaborate will help you level up your skills as a developer so that you understand what it's like to actually have a job. And even more importantly, it'll help you make connections that'll be essential in getting jobs in the future. To this day, despite the fact that I've been coding for 15 years, a significant portion of my coolest opportunities come from my friends that I went to college with. People like my CTO and roommate, Mark. I met him in college. We actually didn't interact too much in college. We were just part of each other's rough friend groups from the other things we did, but we ended up very aware of each other and what each other was good at through the connections we had as we collaborated with other people in each other's networks. So when he moved out here, he was looking for a place. I knew him pretty well. I suggested he considers my extra room. And since then, we have been best friends building everything we build together. These are connections I made through college, through collaboration, both directly and indirectly. And those types of connections are essential to being successful long-term. Because when you are eventually looking for a job, if one of your friends from college that you built things with is on a team that's hiring and they know that you're pleasant to work with, you get to skip that whole pile of shit resumes and go straight into the interview. Those types of things are essential. It's not what you know so much as who you know is the common phrase, but that's very real. And you're starting to build up who you know in your classes. And this is why it's even more important if you don't have courses to find ways to collaborate. Build useful things. Find other people building useful things. Find ways to work with them. Find Discord servers to hang out with these people. Find projects that you could be useful to. Just building things with people will help so much. Mickey's hanging out in chat. If you're not already following his channel, definitely give it a look. He's had a couple really cool jobs, including Convex, one of my favorite companies in the space. And as he just said, he didn't interview at Tempo or at Convex. It was the companies reaching out asking if he wanted a job because he made a splash in the spaces they were in. They saw him and they were interested in potentially working with him. Those are going to be the coolest opportunities. And you get those by being useful. and building trust with people way earlier. And you don't do this expecting every single one of these connections to come out and be useful. You'll probably only have one useful one for every 10 to 50 people you work with. But the goal is, again, to increase the odds that things go well for you. We're trying to stack the deck. The more cards you draw, the more cards you put in the deck, the more outcomes that are positive that exist within it, the more likely you are to have a good outcome. If you make 2 friends in college and neither end up getting a job or on teams that are hiring, you're screwed. If you make friends with 20 devs in college and 3 or 4 of them end up on teams that are hiring, your likelihood of getting a real job soon is way, way higher. And if you find yourself jealous of that super social person that you went to college with, that like was on the football team or whatever, barely knew how to code, but got a job fresh out of college, this is why. They made the connections and the friendships, and they were pleasant and easy to trust and work with. Even if the work was bad, they made it easy to do. The easier you can be to work with, the better chance you have at getting work. I have a whole video about luck surface area that goes deeper on this idea, but you really need to be focused on increasing the likelihood that a lucky thing happens. Because in the end, getting a job is luck some amount. So the more opportunities you have to have that lucky thing happen, the higher likelihood you have to succeed. On that topic, here's one that's a little harder to describe that's very, very valuable. Be useful. This is tough because there's 2 sides to it. There is the being useful part, but more importantly, there's the understanding how to be useful part. You don't know what useful is until you've experienced it on the other side. And you get there largely by doing things. Here's an experience that you either have or haven't had, and which you fall on will tell me a lot about where you're at. You're working on a project, you have some weird error happen when you use this specific library. You have no idea what's going on, so you Google search it. The first 2 results are useless, but the third one is a random old GitHub issue where the person reported the problem, and then 3 months later, somebody else said, hey, I have this problem too, here's how I solved it. And now it's been 3 years, and their answer kind of works, but is also out of date and not supported. But at the very least, you unblocked yourself by seeing that. If you haven't had an experience like that at some point, you're not building enough. You need to go ship a lot more. Something you'll learn is there's a lot of valuable knowledge and information around the web from other developers over the last many decades, working on things similar to you, running into problems similar to you, using technologies similar to you. And here's the kicker. Those people are also similar to you. And if you can relate to them and you can understand them, you can very quickly become useful to them and then eventually become friends of theirs. So if you do have issues like that, if you have a problem with a tool you're using and you find one of those old threads and the information in it is mostly right but kind of out of date, figure it out, fix it, and leave the comment that unblocks the next person. I've legitimately hired somebody because I recognized their username from a GitHub thread where they solved a problem that I was having. I know it sounds crazy, but I've actually done that. It wasn't as direct as I recognize your name, you get a job. But when they hit me up about potentially working with me and their username on Twitter was the same as their username on GitHub, and I recognized them, I was like, oh shit, do you use this library? They're like, yeah, I'm in the issues for it all the time. That was a huge trust builder because it meant that this person isn't just hitting me up with a random cold resume. They're actually in the weeds doing the shit, and they understand the same things I understand. They spend times in the same places I do. When I am hiring as an engineer, I'm not looking for people who feel very different from me inherently. So the more you can be in my spaces and do the same things I do and breathe the same air I breathe, so to speak, the easier it is for you to get that job. Note things that I didn't say here. Pull requests. I'm not saying you need to go contribute all sorts of slop to random GitHub repos. In fact, nowadays, that's kind of a bad look. I also didn't say fill GitHub with all sorts of random open source projects with 0 to 1 stars. What I did say, very, very explicitly, is spending time in the Issues tab. Being useful in issues is one of the best green flags I can see from a developer. If I go check your GitHub profile and what I see is you opening detailed issues with clear reproductions on the problem you had so that somebody could go solve it, and I see you commenting on existing issues with useful information, and then I see you hanging out in the Discord communities for these projects, answering people's questions, linking them to the right sources, and then I see you hanging out in my Twitch chat, like a lot of these people are, dropping me really useful resources throughout. Like Maria here, just linking a video I was referencing to somebody that was based on an article that was written based on my video. It's so surprisingly easy to be useful, but you need to understand what useful is. And the only way you know what useful is if you're doing shit. You don't know what a useful issue is compared to a useless one until you've seen both. and one helped you and one didn't help. You don't know what a good answer to a question is until you've seen them happen in the Discord server or you've asked one or two of them yourself. You got to be in the trenches to understand the trenches. And once you understand them a little bit, you'd be amazed how quickly you can become useful. One of my favorite interactions I ever had that happened in my Discord, pretty sure it's Roy. Roy, thank you, Krish. Legend. Again, the people who hang out here a lot and whose names are associated regularly with things that are useful become my favorite people. The moment Krish needs a job, I will hand him to any company interested because he comes in and answers if I can't complete the thought, he can because he gets it. And you get the idea. So the example I want to give is somebody from my community named Roy. Roy very quickly became one of the most helpful people in the community, despite the fact that he didn't have a software dev job. He was effectively doing semi-technical customer support and was building things on the side for fun. This is Roy. Sorry for calling you out like this one, man, but you are the literal golden example of what I'm describing here. It's also worth noting that Roy was a career shifter. He did not go to school for software development, as far as I recall. He was working in other spaces and teaching himself how to code on the side. And through that, found my community, had a couple questions, really liked the way we were building, and very quickly became the number one question answerer in my Discord. After a few weeks spent there, he started to get the things we built and why we built them that way and internalize these concepts and quickly realized he could just answer the questions. Eventually, another dev that you guys might have seen on YouTube, Melky, started hanging out in my server as well because he was starting to use my stack, the T3 stack. And he had questions about it, in particular, some weird things he wanted to do with TRPC. Roy answered his questions in my server very quickly. Afterwards, Melky started DMing Roy, asking him questions about these things because he wanted to go even further and found Roy to be really clear, concise, and useful. Melky randomly hits me up a week or two later saying, holy shit, Roy is one of the most useful people I've ever talked to. He's so helpful. To which I respond, yeah, isn't it crazy that he doesn't have a dev job yet? Melky's response to this was one of the funniest messages I've ever gotten. ... You're joking, right? Wait, you're not joking? What the fuck? I thought he was at least 10 years my senior. What do you mean he isn't an experienced developer? What do you mean he doesn't have a job? What the fuck, Theo? Which I then screenshotted and sent to my friend who was hiring at Clerk, and sure as shit, Roy now works there. If you ask anybody who's worked or works at Clerk about Roy, their response is going to look something like this. He's now a knowledge well within Clerk. Everyone loves working with Roy because he just cares to be helpful. And he felt so grateful to the community for helping him learn that he paid it back 100-fold and is now a golden example of how to do this. He used my community and space to learn, and through that process, learned things that others hadn't quite learned yet and could use that to be useful. He immediately paid forward 10x what he had gotten from my space. I would argue he barely got anything other than some names of some cool technologies, but became one of the most important people in said community very, very quickly. And it's not that hard to do. Huge shout out to Roy. He more than deserves all of his success. But more so than me or other YouTubers, I think Roy is the model you should be looking at for how to do well in the fast, quickly changing tech landscape. So what does it look like to do this now? Obviously, people ask AI more and more questions, and they ask Stack Overflow less and less. So a lot of these opportunities aren't as visible as they were before. But believe me, there are still plenty of them. There are so many repos that have lots of issues on them that don't have a good reproduction. If you are working with a tool and you run into a problem and you find an issue that's already cut for that tool that doesn't have a reproduction, it doesn't show how to replicate it, it purely shows a vague error message about the same thing you had, go in there with a reproduction, spin it up on StackBlitz or make a new GitHub repo that is a very simple, minimal example that showcases the issue. This shows so many different skills. It shows that you're resourceful because you found this issue. It shows that you're not trying to waste people's time because you're trying to make it easier to solve the issue. It shows that you're not just trying to get a random drive-by PR because a PR filing might be with the goal of getting merged. Nobody's commenting on an issue so they get credit. They're commenting on issues so the issue can be resolved. And it also shows that you understand the problem space well enough to reduce it to a very easy to see version of the same problem. If you can come in and say, hey, I looked at this, these 3 things didn't solve it, here is a simple example that showcases the problem, you bet your ass every maintainer on that project that sees it is going to remember your name and like you. And it's not that hard to do that. Or if you're on Twitter and you see somebody having an issue with a thing, reply to them or DM them offering to help. Or you see somebody in a Discord server asking questions about a thing you just had to resolve yourself. Tell them how you did it. Every time you have a problem, someone else is going to have the same problem. Do your best to remember it and try, and it's a weird way of thinking, try to write down the 2 sentences that would have saved you that time. If you spent a day or two trying to figure something out and then finally figure it out, think to yourself, when you're still in that questioning moment where you just figured it out, you have a really novel opportunity to take what you learned and try to find the smallest version of it that could have helped you a few days ago when you first had the issue. Try doing this, and maybe, just maybe, try writing it down, because in the future, you'll see someone else having the same problem. And if you offer to help, you are suddenly way more trustworthy, way more collaborative, way more useful, and way more memorable. I remember the usernames of the people in my chat who answer questions for me, who bring me useful resources, who build me useful shit. You gotta be memorable, though. Being yet another resume on a pile of shit is not gonna get you a gig. But here's where things get really fun, though. If you do all of this, in particular, you really start to lean into these new tools to do cool shit, and you're seen as useful to others, you can kind of win against all of the levers. The hiring manager that doesn't know shit about tech sees you have the credentials and you know how to use Cursor and Claude Code really well. That's AI. He's AI ready. Cool. And then the actual engineers on the team are like, oh, I've seen him pop up in the GitHub issues for the things that we use. I've seen him be useful in our space. That's awesome. And then the exec at the company is like, oh, we're hiring AI native engineers, people who grew up using these tools that can modernize our company. It's bullshit, but you can lean into that. Use the lever they're giving you. Take advantage of weird statements like the one that the CTO of Netflix made here about how juniors are AI native. It's stupid, but take advantage of it. And I'm not saying cheat in class. I'm saying use these tools for all sorts of different things and use it to accelerate your learning, your growth, and your completion of things that you want to build. One last piece, because I realize I should bring this up more, because a lot of people struggle with coming up with ideas on what to work on, especially early when you haven't wired your brain in a way where problems are now things you can go build solutions to. Try turning your questions into projects. It'll feel weird initially. Just as a quick example, a question I had was which different AI models were better at writing. If I wanted to use a model to generate copy for my homepage or help me write an essay, which models are better and worse at this? Sure, there are some benchmarks here and there, but I didn't like those benchmarks. They didn't align with my experience using the models. And I was also curious how they would handle feedback. If you give a model a review of what it wrote and told it to adjust accordingly, how well will it handle that? So I vibe coded a little app locally for having models generate essays based on a prompt, having all the other models give it feedback. It could then update the essay and then comparing all of those. And it was really fun. I learned a ton, and I made actual novel discoveries about how the different models behave in a writing scenario and how they compare to each other. It was a really fun project, and I learned a bunch and have a lot of fun things to talk about when I talk to other companies and people in the space. When you have questions like this, try building your own solutions. If you want to know how much faster Solid and Svelte are than React, build something to figure it out. If you want to figure out why it's so hard to scaffold a C++ project, build some scripting to automatically do it for you and see where the shortcomings and footguns are. If you want to see why people think Rust is so much better than Go, vibe code the same thing in both of them and see the benefits and negatives of each. Build things to answer your questions, and you will learn so much. Okay, I lied. There's one last thing. Be excited. I know this can be hard, especially if you're in that terrifying, oh my God, school's about to end, I don't have a job yet moment. If you've had something that was your job your whole life, be it you were in elementary school, then middle, then high school, during the summer, your job's to relax, and then during college, your job's to learn. When that's over, if you don't have your next thing, it can be scary. You can't let that feeling win. Excitement is essential for success, more so now than ever. And this is your biggest lever against those experienced engineers, the energy you bring in. The fact the whole field is changing is scary, absolutely. But it's also exciting as hell. You don't have to give up 10 years of knowledge to be successful. A lot of the people on this side are going to have to give up a lot more than 10 years of knowledge in order to survive all of these changes. You don't have to code for 10 years to learn how to build a solution to your problem. That's so cool. And because your brain works different, you'll see things differently too. People who were really into the Nokia, into the BlackBerry, did not know how to use a smartphone with a touchscreen keyboard for a long time, and they couldn't figure out how to build their apps around it because their mindset was so deeply baked into the old way of doing things. And the things are changing quick, too. They're already very different than they were when I grew up, and they'll be even more different in a year. Take advantage of that. Anything you can think of, you can build some version of. Maybe you can't build a multi-million user, $billion a year product that scales infinitely across every platform. But if you want to build Twitter for dogs, you can go do that with not that much experience, and you'll learn a lot through the process. Be curious, be excited, be collaborative, be in the trenches, do shit. And as long as you're here with us and you're hanging out with us and you're talking to people that work in code every day, you'll probably do pretty well. I would bet pretty good money that you could measure the number of devs somebody talks to in a given week against how hard they are struggling to find a job, and it'll be a pretty linear relationship. If you spend more time interacting with devs, working with other devs, talking to them, hearing what they're doing, hearing what they're struggling with, collaborating with them to build your own solutions, answering their questions, asking them questions, you will almost certainly figure things out. But you gotta be there and you gotta start being useful. Balancing out how much you ask versus how much you share is a key part here too. Your goal should be, as quickly as possible, to give more than you take, to answer more questions than you ask, to be more useful than you are using. The best thing in the world you could ever do in one of these technical interviews is answer a question that the person giving the interview doesn't know or understand. Be collaborative, be useful, be energized, be ready. And eventually you will start to build the types of trust you need to be successful. And one last thing, I would like to selfishly thank the companies that suck so bad at hiring that I can get the best engineers at the world at discount prices. I appreciate each and every one of you guys. I pay my team fairly, to be very clear, but the fact that I can get these legends working for me because big companies don't even know how to interview them is a huge edge. And if you're interested in building something useful and making your own startup, you should take advantage of that too. If you're starting your own company, take advantage of the fact that everybody sucks at interviewing. Poach people from great companies. Take the opportunity to hire better than your competition because your competition almost certainly sucks at hiring. I think I've said everything I have to here. Had a lot to say. I hope this is useful to somebody. I know that these ones can vary because I haven't been a junior in a long time. And I know a lot of people were looking for me to come in here and be like, look at the numbers. You're so fucked. Stop feeling bad. I don't want to do any of that shit. I just want y'all to understand why people don't want to hire you specifically. That was quite a rant. I hope this is useful. Let me know if it is or if it isn't and what I can do better next time. And until next time, peace nerds.